Less than 2 months until the early signing period. Jared Roser with Sam Spiegelman for Louisiana versus all y'all's recruit that boot. Tuning Sam in from a new background. I don't know if it's a full Canadian tuxedo or just the denim top or what we got going on, but we got new background, new look, new vibes. Same Sam though, right? What's going on,
Yeah,
man?
no, we're working remote from the living room, the dining room. I don't even know what you call this space.
It is a
But
room.
we're working remotely. Not the full Canadian tuxedo. I did. Someone got a picture of me when we were at state championships. It had to be what 2017, 2018. I didn't even know what that phrase meant at the time. And since then, I've been very cognizant not to make that fashion faux pas again. But in the state of mobile remote working, these pants up below, I would say we are a downgrade to jeans potentially. Wearing these sweatpants here, enjoying this 75-degree weather here in Texas with sweatpants.
You say fashion faux pas. I think for a lot of people, it's a goal. It's the fashion. It's the lookbook that they're going for is the full Canadian tuxedo.
Fair enough.
All right. I mentioned we're less than 2 months away from signing day, and we're going to talk about some guys that may not end up at LSU. We've spent so much time talking about guys that are committed to head to LSU and what they mean to the class. I don't know that we're going to see a whole lot more movement from the Tigers the rest of the way, but there are still certainly some great players around the state that are going to end up, whether a late push from LSU or elsewhere. Obviously, always a lot more than, just a dozen or two great Louisiana seniors, but we'll get into kind of uh, taking turns picking some of those guys and first look at one of the guys that, I mean, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about is a guy that I saw Friday night over at Lutcher, Rashad Sterling, a guy that we both like an awful lot, who's committed to Houston right now and just looked every bit the part of the top prospect on the field that night, was disruptive at the point of attack to Edie White's option offense, behind the line early and often, and looks like somebody that if I'm LSU or Tulane, I really want to try and get away from Coach Willie Fritz and company. Give me your thoughts on Rashad, who is the first of those Cougar commits from in-state that kind of started the trend this summer.
Yeah, whether he ends up playing in Houston and Baton Rouge, Uptown, or I know he's got a couple of big games still in the dog yard coming up, and potentially beyond it. So it looks from the way that Lutcher's been looking, he's looking the part, as you said. I wasn't present at the dog yard with you and Garland for the Fox 8 local game of the week or the Louisiana Fox 8 partnership, unfortunately, but. From what I was able to see from your clips, had me watching through his senior mid-tape film. Really impressive get off the ball. Like you said, it looks like he's continued to grow. He's continued to build out his frame, able to move at that size and chase down ball carriers out to the sideline, cause havoc behind the line of scrimmage. It looks like he's really using his hands to his advantage well this season. I really like where he's looking at this point. We talked at length about this group of defensive front seven players and really defensive front four players for much of the offseason. And now we're talking about the importance of senior seasons. And this is exactly what we were hoping to see from Rashad. This is exactly the player we saw in glimpses of as a junior. And then what he's grown and developed into as a senior has been very impressive so far. And you got to see it firsthand on Friday night.
No doubt. And I mean, we'll kind of use Rashad as the jumping off point for the concept of some of these guys that, right now don't look likely to end up at LSU. Rashad is one of the guys in the state that I do think Tigers fans should really keep a close eye on. I mentioned, I think the Jacob Bradford flip from Houston a little over a week ago felt like one of the final pieces of this 25 class for LSU. But one place where they could potentially add another body is a guy that can provide some pressure off the edge, which Rashad is, in my opinion, kind of a versatile defensive line prospect who is certainly capable of doing that. And he's somebody that I asked him, he said, still fully committed to Houston, but he has continued to hear from LSU coaches and Tulane coaches who are really pushing to at least get him back on campus for a game the back half of the season. And that's something that he plans to do. So if you get Rashad up to Baton Rouge for, say, for a Bama LSU game and get a chance to see some of the progress under Blake Baker and Kevin Peoples and those guys, the relationship that he has with Frank Wilson, Sherman Wilson and company. I mean, what do you see as, if you were kind of handicapping the situation of Rashad ends up a Cougar or Rashad ends up potentially a Tiger or a wave, I guess. What do you look at as kind of the way
He rides the wave.
rides the wave down to Ullman? Yeah. What do you see as your just not reporting anything here, but your gut feeling on how the next couple months play out for Rashad Sterling?
Yeah, my motto is always to follow the visits. And like you said, he's been pretty firm in his commitment to Houston, but really, he's been paying attention to his senior season at Lutcher.
Yeah.
It's a pretty, it's a straightforward mentality over there under Coach Jenkins, who he committed before his season, and he can revisit things if and when that's over. But like you mentioned, Tulane and LSU haven't gone anywhere, and neither have those Houston coaches. They love to start a wave of players like Rashad, who they think can come in and play early. And I'm sure Rashad is liking what he's hearing, and he's liking what he's hearing from the staff, and seeing the opportunities on the field, even though they're not having as strong of a season as he might have liked. But listen, from being in Baton Rouge over the summer, I know that this LSU staff is not going to go stop recruiting Rashad. And if he's having the season that you and I believe he's having, and we're watching on tape, and what you got to see in the dog yard, um, it's not too far of a trip to get him from Lutcher over to Baton Rouge, and there'll still be opportunities along the way, and there'll be a wave of in-state visits that are going to be coordinated around the LHSA playoffs. And I would expect that he might be taking one of those visits to get a look at LSU, to either confirm that he wants to go to Houston, or leave no box unchecked, which is it tends to be. And I wouldn't be surprised if Tulane was able to squeeze in a visit out, the way that Coach Summerall and that staff have been recruiting at that clip as well.
Just kind of mentioning a couple other guys that are on the field Friday night. Trenton Chaney, the Cajuns commit, just a really versatile weapon for Lutcher, and ends up scoring 3 touchdowns, a long touchdown catch down the sideline. I think ends up being about 60 or 70 yards. I mean, just beat the guy right off the line, and then there was no catching him because of the speed that he brings, and caught it smoothly over the shoulder. Ashton Stark, a young guy for that Lutcher team, playing a lot of DB. I think he's probably a receiver at the next level, but he's showing that he could really do either at a high level. And for a young guy to not only have some of his athletic traits with his speed and whatnot, but his instinctiveness and confidence to go make plays, and some physicality to get to the backfield and make some plays on some of those Edie White runs. Really impressive. Also, shout out Edie White's Marshall committed kicker, Ty Powell, 2 for 2 on field goals, 2 for 2 extra points. He was really looping, high hanging punts all night that I don't know if there was a punt return by Lutcher because of the hang time on those punts. And then Ty is also putting every kick for most of the game into the end zone until he decides, you know what, I'm going to just drill this ball off the return man, and it's going to go out of bounds inside the 10 and back these guys up at the 7-yard line. So there was a lot to like there from Ty. But piggybacking off of the Rashad dynamic and looking at some of the other top prospects around the state that LSU fans, whether they should monitor down the stretch these last couple months, or we have a feeling there's a chance that those guys end up elsewhere, and that in a year, 2 years, 3 years, LSU fans are kind of watching on a Saturday on an LSU bye week, scratching their heads wondering, how the heck did we let this guy get out of state because they're performing at such a high level elsewhere? I think that's something that Rashad certainly fits the mold of for me. Whether he ends up at LSU, where I think he can have success, or a Tulane, where I think he'd be great, or sticks with Houston, I think he's someone that we're looking at as a likely really productive college player, that if he does end up with the Cougars, LSU fans look back and say, what happened there? Why didn't we get the kid from Letcher a couple of years ago? And so we'll start with Rashad as a guy that we've already talked about at length. Who else? I know you did more homework for this than I did and have a whole list of guys there in front of you. Who would be the next guy that you would mention that you think LSU fans might be watching in another uni at some point and thinking, man, if only it was purple and gold?
Yeah, sorry, you froze for a second. I was gonna say that when you're not the smartest, when you're not the best looking, when you're not the most athletic, you have to just work a little bit harder, Jared. So I'm just trying to hold up my end of the podcast. I'm gonna try to match your position by position. Actually, is what I was thinking about during that brief freeze. So I'm gonna stick with the defensive line, someone that I'm really high on, someone I think that you're really high on as well. Um, Joshua Lewis, the Missouri commit from Dutchtown. I think he's also having a great senior season. I think he had a really fantastic offseason. I was really impressed with the way his body frame kind of developed into his senior year. He's playing nasty as a senior over there. You can't help but think about Dutchtown and watching Dylan Sampson kickstart that Tennessee offense, and they let him get out of state, and it's just sometimes it's just not a sometimes it doesn't always fit, and you have to credit Missouri. That staff has come into Louisiana often and found gems. Um, and I think Joshua Lewis is one of those guys like Rashad at that position. You don't want to let them leave the state if they have that kind of juice. And I think Joshua Lewis has that kind of juice the same way Rashad does.
Yeah, Josh. I mean, Josh, a tall, long. I think another guy that could be versatile depending on how you develop him in the weight room over the next few years. But a guy that has some quickness to his rush off the edge, but also uses his hands really well, plays really physical, does a nice job of getting into passing lanes when he can't get home on his rushes, and is a big piece of that Griffins team. That's one of the last remaining undefeated teams in the state right now as we head into week 8. Somebody who feels a little similar to the Dylan Sampson dynamic, where he's certainly been on that LSU radar throughout his high school career, but the Tigers haven't really made a move, and Missouri is taking full advantage right now. He's another one that, yeah, you said you like, and you're pretty confident I like. There's no doubt about it.
All right, who's next on your list? I think I know who you're going to say next, but
Yeah, I think you do as well. And just kind of piggybacking somewhat, transitioning off of the Dylan Sampson pick, I'll look at a running back and a guy that I saw 2 weeks ago, and we've talked about quite a few times on here. But Nate Shepard at Mandeville, the Duke commit, who is not hearing much from LSU right now, from what I hear, from what he tells me. He's hearing a little bit more even from another SEC program that he's kind of keeping close to the vest. And Tulane is not shy about the fact that they would certainly love to keep him in state. But he's a guy that
who
whatever the
wouldn't?
role, yeah, whatever the role is for him in a backfield, where if you look at it from the LSU perspective, and we don't have to do this with each guy and look at it as who they already have on board, because that's not necessarily as big a part of the equation for LSU fans when they're watching on a Saturday and just seeing a dude go for 150 yards or whatever it is. But even with the context of JT Lindsey and Harlem Berry already committed, I think Nate and really all those guys are so versatile at what they can bring to a room where you want to have two, three, four guys you can rely on a given Saturday, that Nate's someone that certainly brings something to that equation that could be really valuable on a Saturday evening in Death Valley, or a Saturday in any stadium at the college level. I think he's a guy that's going to go out there and be a great running back for the Blue Devils if that's where he ends up at college, where he's committed to. But beyond just what he can do in terms of his running back skills, taking the handoff, or little swings out of the backfield or whatnot, you can move him around the offense, and he can run routes and catch balls down the field as well as most receivers, in the 25 class. He's a guy we've also seen play at a high level as a returner, as a safety, and can do so many different things, and just brings a level of intelligence and edge to his play too, that I think it just adds a lot to a locker room and to a position group, regardless of where that is in terms of position or school.
Yeah, you know what? Watching all the NFL. We're recording this on Monday. Spoiler alert for the fans at home. But having just watched all these games on Sunday, you just see how much the running backs are a part of these NFL passing games, and you can't help but think about what Nate brings in that dimension that so many running backs aspire to. So that versatility, that jack of all trades, mentality. skill set that he brings to the table. I mean, he can play on 3 downs, which is really as dangerous of a weapon as he is. He's valuable as well to an offense and on special teams. I told you I was going to match you for positions. So I'm thinking, if I'm LSU and I have Harlem Berry and JT Lindsey, I can see passing on Nate because with Harlem and JT, the skill sets overlap a little bit with Nate as well. And JT does have a power element to his game that we're seeing as a senior season at Ash. And he is really just, he's on a tear this season. I'm one of those dome hopefuls that we're hoping to catch. But Jasper Parker is also having a sensational season, obviously resetting all the record books at Shaw. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were together, but if Harlem Berry and Nate Shepard and JT Lindsay aren't, talked about enough, it gets Jasper Parker's the one that we kind of leave out there. And he's not only, this is why I think it might hurt LSU, and they have kept an open line of communication with Jasper and his family, but compared to Harlem, who's about 5'11", 185 pounds, JT, who's about 6 foot, 6'1", just under 200, I would say, or pretty close to. Jasper Parker is built like a tank. He's built like he should play in the SEC. He's north of 6'1". He's got a broad frame. He's 210, 15 plus pounds. We talk about the pass receiving skills of Nate Shepard or JT Lindsay or Harlem Berry, but Jasper's a really great receiver. We saw that at the Rivals 5-star in Jacksonville. I had to do a double take to make sure that was Jasper making an absurd contested catch, but that's been a theme for Hank Tierney's offense this year at Shaw. They have Jacob Washington, and you really have Jasper Parker running between the tackles, beating defenders to the outside and carrying them with him, and also making plays as a receiver downfield and down the seams. What else could you ask for? So I think if you're LSU, you have this great group of running backs, but they're short on depth at that position to begin with. And if you can recruit all these high school running backs, one of multiple are going to end up breaking out on Saturdays. But you talk about what Dylan Sampson is doing. If you have a chance to recruit Jasper Parker to be a part of this potential backfield, he could certainly fit in with his skill set compared to JT, compared to Harlem. And even if you think about from first down to second down to third down, they all bring different diverse and overlapping skill sets that makes an offense dangerous in its own capacity.
We saw how quickly over the last month and a half a really stocked LSU running back room can suddenly become okay. The true freshman really needs to step up. John Emery's hurt right now, and all the unfortunate news for him early this season. Josh Williams right now I think Josh is like our age at this point. He's been at LSU for a long time, and so he'll wrap up his LSU career now. And you'll look at a running back room where you hope to see Trey Holly back. Still waiting on news on him, but you have the young guys, Caden Durham and Caleb Jackson. But you're seeing right now in real time how quickly you can need someone, not only a second back, but a third back and potentially a fourth back. And with a couple of these guys off the roster after this year, you have to continue to kind of restock that group. And it can be a tough sell potentially for guys that don't necessarily want to be a part of a 2 or 3 back class, but there's opportunities there for several backs on a roster any given fall. Let's keep it at 5, I guess, total guys that we talk about. And I'm going to let you wrap it up. We'll kind of wrap it up in snake fashion a little bit. Jasper was actually, for me, I looked at my top 3 were probably Rashad, Nate, and Jasper that I would talk about. And there are some other great options up and down this list with a lot of depth. You got James Simon committed to Texas, Jabari Antoine to the U, Corey Adams and Corey Amos both to Ole Miss. On down the line, you mentioned Jacob Washington. I think a kind of a different athlete, Jalen Coleman, and everything he brings as an explosive return game type guy is really interesting. Landon Hammond is a DB I really like, the Tulane guy we talked about recently. But if you were picking a 5th guy to kind of round this up that you think is poised for a great college career that LSU fans in particular are going to feel like, how did we let this one get away? Who would the last guy that we need to look at be?
First of all, that setup was beyond perfect, and you deserve all the credit in the world. You literally just read off my list, almost in order, because obviously Jabari is, if I'm trying to keep Aiden Anding in the state, if I'm trying to keep Jacob Bradford in the state, I'm also trying to keep Jabari Antoine in state. If it's a DB that's a priority guy. I think he's got all the world skills. Some of the best DBs I've seen. A lot of them have been committed to Miami, and like Jabari, they play quarterback. They play some snaps in the secondary, and they're just dynamic on both sides of the ball. I think that makes for a great DB, and Jabari fits that mold. And James Simon was definitely high on that list too, for a lot of the same reasons we talked about with Jasper. I mean, he's a 3 down back. James is also a very gifted receiver. I think he's one of the best between the tackles. We've seen him in person multiple times, and he's a no brainer, sure thing, in my opinion. It just, you have to credit Shard Choice at Texas for being a great recruiter right there. Um, but the guy I want to go with is Tulane commit Josh Brantley. I think this is one of the most severe cases of under recruited players I have ever seen in my time doing this, which is getting longer and longer each year, obviously. Um, but he is,
You're in
I
your
remember watching him warm.
you're in your Josh Williams 6th year or 16th year
I
or
feel
whatever
like
of
I'm the Josh
eligibility.
Williams of the recruiting industry, except Josh is walking out with multiple degrees, and I'm just getting old and losing my hair, um, and my vision, and honestly, access to my office while we're at the case. Josh, he's 6'3". He's 200 pounds. He ran a verified 4.5 40 going into his junior season at Ruston. He led Ruston back to the state championship, back to the promised land. He is such a dynamic athlete. Obviously, at a certain point in his recruitment, they realized he was not a quarterback. At least at the Power Four level, and they were open to being recruited as either an offensive or defensive athlete. And schools like LSU, like Ole Miss and Mississippi State all took a look at him. I think LSU liked him at safety. I think Ole Miss was flirting with the idea of offense. But ultimately, he falls to Tulane. I just think he is so dynamic. All of his measurables line up. He is a winner, first and foremost. And I think about what 6'3", 210 pounds with 4.5 speed. We see what he's like running with the ball. We've seen him wrap up a state championship running the ball to the edge. I don't see what world SEC teams can't find a role to get that guy in their weight room and juice him up and be a dynamic receiver. Or yeah, he could learn safety. He's a gifted athlete, but he's never played safety in his life. But he was open to it. I think if I was LSU, and that's a guy that I think is going to play at Tulane. Coach Summerall is going to get real creative with him. I think he's going to see the field sooner than we realize. And I would not be surprised if LSU was among the teams waiting to get back in the door in a couple of years. I just can't really fathom why it never took off for him. Maybe it's something that I'm missing, and I'm more than happy to admit that. But to me, he checks a lot of boxes as a project guy. He's someone I would take a chance on 10 out of 10 times.
I love that. That was, not someone that, as I was kind of rattling down the list that I mentioned, obviously, but I agree completely in terms of his athletic profile and everything that he brings as someone that, if we're looking at a year, 2 years or so down the line, as he kind of adjusts to a new position, has a chance to be really special. I know right now, if there's any chance that John Summerall and Brock Hayes and JJ McCleskey and company are all watching this, they're saying, shut up, Sam. Don't tell anybody. Just let him come
My
on
phone
down
is
uptown.
ringing right now. It's just buzzing.
So the five guys we end up kind of prioritizing there: Rashad Sterling, Josh Lewis, Nate Shepard, Jasper Parker, Josh Brantley. If you were ranking those in order of the likeliest possibility that you thought LSU could make this late play and add them to the class, how would you kind of rank those?
I'd keep Rashad at the top. He had the offer before his senior season, and obviously they've continued to chip away into his senior season. Lutcher has had a strong track record. LSU, I should say, LSU has had a great record of recruiting Lutcher players in the past. Behind him, Jasper Parker, like I mentioned. Um, I think that we would all be rooting for Nate Shepard to be getting to LSU, and I think that there was an interest from at one point in this process, but LSU has kept the door open with Jasper Parker. They've yet to offer, but that he's kept the door open. I think that's an open line of communication. Frank Wilson, he's the Godfather, but his home base is in New Orleans. So if he wants to get in on the West Bank, he knows how to get there. Um, from that point on, I actually don't think that there's a good shot with Nate, with Josh, or Josh, for that matter. Like we talked about, I think that those are guys that are destined to go out of state and create their legacies elsewhere, and that's fine too.
No doubt. Look, it's easy for us to sit here and just want to sign all of them and keep everybody close to home, and it'd be easy to go see them all every Saturday or throughout the week at player interviews and whatnot. But obviously, you're trying to build a roster, and you have limited spots, and there's limited opportunities in terms of playing time at different positions and whatnot. I'm glad you mentioned the kind of the line of communication with Jasper, because it was funny when I asked him a month and a half ago about how some of this was developing, if he was hearing from some other schools, and he respects so much A, his senior season, but B, his relationship with those Michigan coaches, that he kind of smiled. He's like, yeah, I'm hearing from some schools. I'm hearing from a certain school. He kind of knew what I was alluding to, but didn't want to get into it too much. But that's definitely a line that is there, and we'll see over the next, again, less than 2 months now, how crazy it is that we're getting this close to the end of the year already. But Sam, I appreciate you as always taking some time to talk about all of it.
Happy to be on Recruit That Boot. I think, as we kind of were talking about what we were going to talk about on the podcast today, and week 8 for the LHSA, where we're about a month away from kind of having an idea of who's going to be dome bound, and a great first season, really, at least from the regular season. It's winding down for me, it feels like. So just shout out to us for this podcast. I've been having fun doing this every week, so happy to be a part of it.
Shout out to us. Like the old dirty bastard line is like, shout out myself. But
That's how
yeah,
I
man,
feel at this point. I'm
we're in
I'm
this
keeping receipts.
we're in this crazy part of the season where, I mean, I was texting you earlier. It feels like we've been going for so long, and man, we're already getting into the back half of district play and all these things, but we still have a couple more weeks of regular season and then the gauntlet of the playoffs to see who's going to be with us in New Orleans in December. And so we're really only halfway through the full picture of it all. But it is just heating up and heating up in a way that the games are so good, and we're getting so close to at least knowing a bracket that it feels like we're getting close to the end. And it's been a lot of fun. And I know we have some other topics in the coming weeks to hit on as we get closer to the end of the playoff run, and then ultimately to National Signing Day stuff in December. So as always, thanks to everyone for tuning in, checking us out, listening to our nonsense, particularly a couple minutes at the beginning of every week. And thanks to Sam for his time. And yeah, Louisiana versus Oilers, Recruit That Boot. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jet Roser. Thank y'all once again.